So let's get started. So I introduced myself, and earlier, and today we've got two of my friends in the industry here that I've been involved with for quite a while, and Greg DeShields, who's the president and CEO of Tourism Diversity Matters. Greg, could you describe yourself?
Sure. So once again, Greg DeShields, just a slight edit. I'm the executive director. I think our president and CEO might get a little uncomfortable with me saying that I'm president. But I'm a proud African American. Today I'm wearing a dark suit and tan shoes. But because we were asked that question, I had to put an emphasis back to the point of being a proud African American, because for me, it is all about the hair. Now, some of you may not realize, but to have these type of curls is a bit of an adjustment that you have to go through in the morning. So I'm really proud about how I actually identify myself through my hair. Many of you may know about the Crown Act, and the Crown Act is really an emphasis about how people of color are able to present their natural hair. Now, this does have a little bit of an extra emphasis to make it better, but I did want to point out that, you know, I have curly hair, I have a part in my hair, and it's part of the brand that represents me.
Okay, thank you. John? John Morris is, well, I can partially introduce John because I've known him for a while, and he was one of the first people I spoke with when I was doing my listening tour in 2019 because he had a blog. And I was reading his story on the blog, and I think I'll just let him tell the story, but it was really compelling to me. John Morris has a blog called Wheelchair Travel, and just the .org, I believe, right? Just the I highly recommend that you follow him on this blog and in his social media. So, John, you want to introduce yourself and your background?
Yes, absolutely. John Morris. I'm a white 33-year-old guy, but I look 40 after my car accident. Actually, the oldest I've ever been guessed is 48. That was somewhat offensive. No offense to any of the, 48-year-olds, and we have a barely 50 Jake Steinman here. I'm wearing a blue coat and tan pants. I have no shoes because I'm a triple amputee, but I save a lot of money. I don't know what Greg paid for those, but that's an expense I will never endure again. I guess just a brief statement on my website, wheelchairtravel.org. I chose the domain name for SEO purposes. I wanted to control search on Google for accessible travel information. And if I've been to your destination, I hope that my story outranks your website on that Google search. I believe in empowering people through mobility and opportunity. That is something that is very important to me. I was a very frequent traveler before my car accident, and as I languished in the hospital for more than a year, I was told that I would probably never travel again. And that's something that really inspired me to take action and get out there and try to travel and then begin sharing what I was learning. And so that's really everything that's behind what I do. The desire to share the world with others. My tagline is open your world, and that's what I'm focused on helping people do.
And so I think that what they don't realize is how addicted you are to travel. When I first met John in that phone call, what shocked me was that I said, well, how often do you travel? He said, well, it's the last couple of years, it's averaged about 310 days a year. Wow. So, John, how many flights have you taken? He's recorded everything. John is one of these guys that just, that keeps a log of everything he's experienced. And so, John,
I love spreadsheets. I actually recently started a spreadsheet for movies that I've watched. Totally pointless and worthless. No point at all. But I recently, earlier this year, had my 1,000th flight as a wheelchair user. Kind of an exciting milestone. I had passed 1 million miles before that as a wheelchair user. Flown on many different airlines. I love to fly, even though air travel kind of stinks for disabled people. We'll talk a little bit about that later today, I think.
and then how many hotels have you stayed in?
It's more than 500 now. I stay in a lot of different hotels, cities all around the world. Been to more than 50 countries. A lot of times, you know, in some cities like Orlando, where that was actually my home base for a little while, I stayed probably 30 or 40 hotels in that city alone, just to be able to advise people and understand sort of what things look like out there.
So let's just get started. Okay, so Greg, why should accessibility be included into the DE&I umbrella?
Sure. So, you know, from our perspective at Tourism Diversity Matters, it's always been. One of the things that we felt early on as we launched Tourism Diversity Matters, and for some of you who don't know, we serve as the resource for the tourism industry on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we believe very much in the dimensions of diversity, which includes the able-disabled community, it includes both race and ethnicity, it includes faith-based veterans. I mean, the reality of it is we as an industry are far more effective when we think inclusive of all communities. And to that degree, we've always looked at it from the very beginning. And I think accessibility has played a very important part within the DEI discussion, because so many organizations have really begun to understand the importance of the business strategy that is associated with DEI, and how these particular initiatives, although they're great for their community representation and their community involvement, but they've been able to build business strategies that show that it is good for either their destination or for their organizations. And to that degree, I think as we move into a space of where there's more discussion around accessibility, it certainly provides an opportunity for more guests and for more discovery, and certainly for those organizations that may want to expand their market segments, that they can create new and different visitors.
Okay, so John, why should it stand alone? Yes.
So I'm gonna offer a half answer, because Greg and I don't actually disagree.
We're just going to make it look like we do.
However, you know, I think that one of the things that I see growing out of DEI programs and employee resource groups and things of the like is the opportunity for innovation and accessibility, sort of going beyond the baseline to make the workplace more inclusive, easier to navigate, more welcoming of disabled team members. But I think that sort of before we even get to that point, there's a foundational level of accessibility that we have to solve for. Because if we have an inaccessible environment, you know, disabled people can't participate. They can't show up at the office to do their work, or perhaps even make it through the application process. As many of my blind friends have shared with me, their screen readers can't navigate some of the online application systems. So there is a foundational level of accessibility that is necessary and important, and it's a conversation that happens all across the travel industry. One of the things that I hear from some of the hotels that I work with is, well, we don't really have that many disabled guests. Why are we going to invest so much into accessibility? And the reason, you know, for those limited numbers and low occupancy rates is because the accessibility that people need isn't there. And so that really is the key, is, you know, respecting the fact that we've got to provide a baseline of accessibility so that we can attract and provide opportunity to disabled people. And then once they are within the organization elevating their voices through our employee resource groups, through DE&I programs. And I think that's where Greg and I would start to come together, I think. And you may not disagree with anything that I've just said. So.
I don't, and I do think it's important, though, and when we attended Travelability last year, there was a number that was circulated that speaks to the spend that's associated with the able-disabled community. And that's really important because as we look at a variety of other diverse communities, what has really engaged the travel industry is to understand the economic spend that those communities bring. And the fact that over the last 2 years, there's been a better way to articulate the able-disabled community and the amount of economic spend that they bring and how they travel. As families, they tend to have even a greater amount of spending activity that takes place than a regular individual guest. When we do our presentations, we lead with the able-disabled community's economic spend, and then of course we'll talk about the Hispanic community and the African American, the LGBTQ community. But I think when you aggregate those numbers, it helps business leaders have a better sense of the business narrative and the business reasons of why the inclusivity and the accessibility is really important as a strategic approach for them to be successful in their business.
So I have a few questions. I kind of disagree with you both. And just
Of course.
All right, I'm sorry, I failed to take my side, so Jake is going to step in.
So I'll tell you, because, so Greg, you introduced, when I talked to you last year, you introduced the concept of DE&I fatigue. And so, so I thought, and so it was, because it's been 4 or 5 years that people, probably even longer, that they've been involved in DE&I from the racial justice side. And just that can go so far. And then accessibility was something that was new and fits within inclusion. But really, I think the reason DE&I is so important as part of this is because there's actually a point person to deal with this. And so there's someone already in place that can take this over and add inclusion to something. So and then on the other side, I see that, the accessibility, having accessibility, someone dedicated to accessibility, indicates more of a commitment to accessibility than, you have someone that's part of that. That indicates, okay, this destination is farther along and more committed because they can develop product around it, they can create an accessible wheelchair trail, like some of the people that are in our Destination Ally program. They're, some are really advanced and some are really learning, but they all learn from each other and they sort of support each other. So
I think, Jake, you raise an important point. I think that, DEI leaders are really connectors. They're not taking on everything, or they shouldn't be taking on everything on their own. They need to collect input from the communities that are represented within the organization, and the same is true for an accessibility leader. There are a lot of smart accessibility experts in this room. I don't know a single person who knows everything. I don't know anyone who claims they will, or that they do. And so I think one of the incredible things about this community and many of the accessible travel experts in particular that I have an opportunity to work with and interact with is that we're all sharing information with one another to broaden our perspective and understanding, and to utilize the resources and knowledge that other people are bringing. But I think that sort of maybe transitioning a little bit to that DE&I fatigue, I think one of the big problems for accessibility in the diversity conversation right now is that for so long it was left out. I think that many companies have sort of followed the trajectory of starting with race, moving to gender, LGBTQ groups are a fairly recent addition at many companies, and now just starting to dip your toes into the water of disability. And so I think that many people in the disability community look at companies that receive these high DEI rankings, and they say, well, what have they done for accessibility and disability to this point? And so, maybe there is, fatigue on the inside at some organizations. I think other companies, there's a lot of excitement because they're just starting their journeys. But the main thing is that we need to, DEI is, obviously an inward-looking practice, but it also is looked at from the outside by consumers and potential employees, and many companies promote their DE&I initiatives and PR, and we need to have a very good story to tell about the work that's being done on accessibility at every organization.
Though I would maybe want to step in here because there are a couple of things that I do have a point that I'd like to make. So let me just start by saying that DEI did not begin during the summer of 2020, right? It began with the civil rights movement back in the 1960s. And throughout, the last, 40, 50 years or so, we've seen it evolve. It evolved from issues of civil rights, and then it moved to multiculturalism throughout the 70s and the 80s. And then by the time we got to the 90s, we kind of evolved to a point of diversity. And where we are in the 2000 plus is really more about issues of accountability for organizations. And we've certainly began to realize that DEI continues to evolve, as it evolved from 1960. But I did want to point out, as it relates to this discussion of fatigue, a lot of that was really centered upon organizations that, quite frankly, got into DEI from a very performative perspective because everybody was doing it. And I would caution, as we get into discussions of accessibility, that it's conceivable that that could also be performative, that organizations could say, wow, it seems as though accessibility is a big thing now, so let's move there. And that momentum can easily be lost if, in fact, they cannot see that there is return on investment or business growth, because those are the decisions that really drives what people do. But I would also point out that we are within one of the most politically charged and culturally charged environments that we've ever been. And it has made it extremely difficult for organizations, especially in the tourism industry, to maintain the kind of commitment that they originally had and what they want to do. And who knows, after we get on the other side of the election, there may be a whole different environment of how we discuss this. But I'd be cautious of separating it, because the reality of it is that DEI was always a big proponent of inclusion. And even as you look at most DEI programs, there was always an emphasis around how we can add an ability for us to be mindful of those who have various forms of abilities or disabilities to still be a part of it and to contribute and be a part of the overall outcome of any organization. So I don't know if I 100% agree with what you may have put out there, but I would be mindful that separating it would put it in a very vulnerable position, because there are a lot of organizations just see it as another opportunity. It's another opportunity for us to present ourselves as being very diverse and inclusive, when in fact, maybe we're not.
Another reason not to separate it is because nothing really I think one of the reasons that accessibility awareness has been so high recently is because it's adjacent to DE&I.
Right.
And nothing happens without an adjacency. Mm-hmm. And that sort of triggers things. I mean, if you look at, just look at alcoholism. How long did that take for it to be, kind of characterized as a character flaw to a disease? And that's kind of helped with mental health. Just so and that's helped with, and that's helping with disability and DE&I, because it's adjacent to something. So, so I agree with you there. I also point out that you're talking about a politically charged environment. Accessibility is completely apolitical, and it's rare to find an elected official that would be against it. And whether red state, blue state, purple state, it's something they can all get behind. And I think this is something that, when I talk to DMOs and I tell them about this, and they start presenting their initiatives, at these meetings, at their annual meetings, the elected officials call them and they congratulate them. Anyway, I think are we out of time completely? Okay, sorry.
I think we're at -2 minutes, actually.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.